This paper was written in 2010, so it's a little bit dated. But let me kind of give you an idea of how I got started in this whole area. A friend of mine who was in the mortgage business invited me to go to a tax lien sale in Greeley. So this was in 2006, and they used to have them in Island Grove out there, and you'd go in a big room, you'd register, you didn't even have to have certified funds in. So I went in there, and at the rotational sale, I got 2 of them. For about 3 hours worth of work, I made $40. So, but it was fun, and what it really allowed me to do is really just kind of investigate a little bit more about what this whole process was about. And that's when I ended up writing the first paper that came out in the Journal of Personal Finance. And if anybody wants a copy of a PDF of those articles, just send me an email, I'll send you one back. There's 2 articles. The other one was published in 2011, and that's what this one's about, the mortgage crisis and what happened and how it may affect the tax lien. The good thing and bad thing is I'm not a professional in this area, so I'm kind of taking maybe a different kind of look. But on the other hand, you guys are really immersed in all of this. One of the things I can tell you is that when I wrote this paper in 10, it was just hitting the press that Tom was starting the secondary market. I mean, I was going, and so a lot of that actually was speculation back then on my part actually has come through fruition and actually does exist. So from my perspective, being here has actually just been fun because now there's potential to do more research in this area. Because I think over the next several years, we're going to see a variety of changes, big changes, because of securitization and also the liquidity that's provided by the secondary market. So yeah, I can present this, and I will, but a lot of this I'm going to probably veer in different directions simply because it's kind of dated, but that's okay. So one thing I want you to recognize, what I learned today is that Colorado is the only state that has a non-refundable premium. I didn't know that, but now I do, and that's a good thing to understand. The other thing is that I list in both of these papers, and you're well aware of this, is that we don't usually see a lot of foreclosures or tax. That we see treasury deeds, but John Lefebvre, one of the things I want to bring up about is he's been the county treasurer in Weld County for a long time. He said in the 30 years plus that he knows, and going back in the records, they've had 4 properties that have actually kind of been foreclosed, and those were vacant land. It doesn't really happen that often. So those are some facts that I guess we'll just kind of talk a little bit more. The bad thing about being last and knowing that we have happy hour at this point is that you guys are maybe a little bit impatient right now. So I'll try to kind of go through some of this. And again, if you have any questions or you want me to send you a PDF of both articles, I'd be happy to do so. Most of us realize that these tax liens are created on property to meet governmental cash flow needs. And one of the things that they realize is, what's the best way to get this? How do we get third parties to fund this? Why not sell it? We've got great collateral. So we have these liens. They've been around. In 1966, the federal statute was finally passed that clarified the whole idea that if you have a property lien and a federal tax lien, the property lien was deemed to be kind of superior, had priority from that point forward, so that any kind of or confusion from that point on was settled once and for all. That's why we like property liens, because you've got first priority over everybody else. And that actually happened in '66. Most of us realize that this is a property statement that you might get depending on your jurisdiction. My property has more than 6 entities. There's lots of things here. We have lots of little mill districts. The other thing that also has been happening on property taxes is you have what's tax increment financing. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not at all, But what happens is some developers can go ahead and actually bond it and actually have the treasury, put it on a mill levy. So when you pay your taxes, you're actually paying off that tax increment financing. So you might be in a jurisdiction or in one subdivision where you might have, say, 70 mills. The other side of the property that was developed 20 years later may have 135 mills. It varies all over the county, all over the state. Sometimes I saw some down in Parker at 135 mills. Mine is at about 95, and I'm in Fort Collins. So this kind of, we're pretty familiar with all of this. Colorado has kind of a different kind of setting the property values when they're set and then versus when they're actually collected. Probably similar to most other jurisdictions. We also been ad nauseum, we realize here in Colorado by statute we developed the Kansas City Fed's discount rate plus 9%. And so right now they round up to 10, and that's been there for a long period of time. When I bought my first tax lien in 06, it was 14, and I thought that was wonderful. Let's see, what else do we have? Yeah, we already talked about this already. Let's see what else. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. So the other thing that you might see, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the bulk sale. Have you guys been, that the whole idea where the entity decides to contact a third party and instead of kind of just selling them at a discount, thousands of these liens and getting rid of them in that way. We have the auction, and the third one is kind of fairly new, the securitization. So the auction is really the only way that individual investors have an opportunity to actually participate. Jefferson County was the first county in the country to go to online, and that happened in 06, 07. And since then, we've had more and more counties, and I think including Weld, who's been going there. When I talked to John Lefebvre, right after I wrote the first paper in 07, they said they were going to the online auction, number one, because they felt, and the data at that point had indicated that the yields, the actual prices that they were getting, the premiums that they were going to be receiving actually were going to go up, and they were right. So from a public standpoint, from a government entity standpoint, they did the right thing. From an investor standpoint, not the right thing, because now you have competition from all over the country. It's deeper. They're going to drive down the yields that much more because they can bid and they don't have to be present to go ahead and do that. My understanding, I haven't actually bought anything online from Weld County. They open up an auction period, I think 2 weeks before. So is anybody familiar with Weld County? Have you bought any of those? Okay, have you bought Weld? Well, what they do is it's kind of like eBay. They set up 2 weeks before, and then at that point you have an opportunity to go ahead and bid. And it's kind of the same idea. As you get closer and closer to the deadline, all of a sudden the bidding heats up. And so I've never participated, but you can imagine if you've ever been on eBay, you always have to be right there at the last minute to do that last bidding, otherwise someone's going to take you. So I was surprised to learn how many counties still do the in-person. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you're a county treasurer and you want to you do the best thing for your citizens, you really want to consider about going online. Let's see what else. That's the other thing. I sometimes these papers are written for kind of not a group like yourselves who are professionals who've been in the business. But a lot of times we realize that most of these properties, if they have a mortgage, they're not going to have a tax lien because there's an escrow account. So the property taxes usually get paid from that. If you've ever been delinquent, if you've never, if ever done anything, they will force you to go ahead and put money into the escrow account. So the only ones that you would imagine that might have a tax lien that either have been paid off, because if you have any kind of financing, there's usually going to be some mechanism for that to actually happen. The other thing that we have here, and this is again written from the period of standpoint of 2010, we ended up having, and Florida is probably one of the worst states for foreclosure because they do judicial foreclosure. We have statutory foreclosure. We are the only state in the country that has a public trustee. So we're the only one that has a very, very centralized and very nice way of foreclosing on property. So our lag times in actual foreclosures here in Colorado is considerably shorter than what you see in some states. And so one of the things we realize is that during this foreclosure period, there may be a tax lien for a while because no one's taking advantage, no one's doing anything because there's a pending foreclosure. But at any point in time when the actual finalization, there is a transfer of ownership, that lien has to be paid off. So, one of the things I was mentioning in this paper is that right there in 2010, I was forecasting that there was going to be a peak period of when we would see the most tax liens out there simply because of this judicial delay, and that at some point there would be a drawdown of these tax liens simply because once you transfer, you're going to see tax liens being paid off. I don't know if that's been the case, if you saw a spike in 10, 11 around there, but that's kind of what I surmised at this point. Let's see. This is okay. We got that. So this, of course, you guys are in the business. You realize that this has actually happened. The whole idea of the private equity fund, the hedge funds, they've been out there for a long period of time. When I was writing this, there was Mooring, I think it was. Let me see. Mooring, that they were actually coming out with a hedge fund. I don't think they exist anymore. Anybody know about them?
I work for
Jeff used to work for Mooring. Mooring is no longer Mooring. It's now MTAG.
Okay.
Mooring's a private equity fund now.
Okay. But they were a hedge fund for a while, weren't they?
Still.
They still are? Okay.
Yeah, they did many other asset classes.
So the other thing that, as I mentioned when I did this for a bunch of academics, the information is pretty proprietary to find anything about anybody. So I'm really excited if you guys want to share that and maybe have some academic look at it and kind of benchmark it or something like that. That would be helpful for me, but also maybe for yourselves. The other thing that I mentioned in here is that in some local markets, immediately after the crash, we ended up seeing that property values declined 40 to 50%. Phoenix, Arizona was one of those examples where property values just cratered. Well, if you have lower property values, then the assessed values are going to go down, and then you're actually that mill levy against that assessed value is also going to go down. So one of the things that was being predicted by myself and others that you're going to see an increase in property tax rates starting in 10 and onward. Whether we've seen that or not so much. Colorado, I really thought was going to be in that boat, but our recoveries really started in about 11 and have continued ever since. And so now property values are kind of way beyond where they were prior to 2008, I would imagine. The other thing that's also kind of interesting, Boulder County was the only county in Colorado that had no county-wide decline in 08 and 09. It was like nothing ever happened in that county, and I would imagine it's still the same way. I live in Fort Collins right now. Try to find something less than 250. You can't. Even condos and townhomes are going unbelievably priced at this point. It's just been a good recovery. This kind of tells you a little bit about the property taxes and how we do it. We do it biannually or every 2 years. We all got our assessed valuations this past year, and they're actually tied to January 1st of 2014. So they're always kind of in arrears, and they're catching up a little bit. So the next round, perhaps, we might end up seeing a little bit of a lower increase in any kind of mill levies. So I mentioned, Tom, in my paper, it's kind of nice to meet the man behind the actual secondary market. And again, this was just in April or February of 2010. So it's here. It's been here for about 5 years now. So, and now with this new kind of platform that they're taking it to the next level, I think we'll kind of see a kind of an increase in the number of transactions. That's what I'd like to see, be able to get some numbers on who's actually using it. You know, does it actually decreases the yield because now you got more liquidity? You know, what's been the impact of having a well-functioning secondary market? Let's see. So these are just some things that we talk about that you well know about redemptions and reinvestment risk. What else do we have? Let me see. I think that's it. Oh, and the last thing I mentioned, it's not in the presentation, but it's in the paper. There was a situation with Bank of America. There was an article. It was just a great article that was actually came out in the Huffington Post. And it was about the tax liens and how Bank of America and other institutions were actually funding the purchase of these tax liens. I came out, Bank of America was embarrassed, and what I found today, they are no longer in that business. And so, but on the other hand, you can't blame somebody like a bank trying to make lemonade from lemons. You know, you might as well make a little bit of money by lending to people who are going to be buying the tax liens because somebody's going to buy them. So might as well make a little bit of transaction income and interest, and that's all they were doing. But it's hard to have a kind of institution that is lending you on a mortgage, but lending someone else money to go ahead and actually buy the tax lien on the mortgage on that same property. So that's a little bit about both of them. They're not a lot of what I would call calculations. There's just a lot of descriptives. But if you have a client or somebody that you want to kind of give them something easy to read so they can kind of quickly get acclimated about everything, I'll be glad to send them to you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to. If not, we can adjourn. Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, first of all, I want to thank you. It's absolutely wonderful to meet you. As you are well aware, there is a severe lack of real intelligent documented white paper kind of material in this marketplace, and so we certainly see yours, and on the BCMG site we have a few others. Most of them are very dated. We have stuff that's very, very intelligently written from the 90s or from 2010, et cetera. What can we as an industry do to help you and others like you in the academic world write more about this, explore some of the problems that might help us as investors and service providers? We're very interested in collaborating on more thought leadership type pieces. So what can we do?
Well, share. Yeah, what I mean by that is, when I was writing this paper, I reached out to the National Association. I don't know who it was at that point, and a few others, and never heard back from them. And part of it is, and I can understand, for example, if you have a private equity firm or somebody who is competing with others, you certainly don't want to share any secrets. But I think people would be interested to kind of see the actual strategies about how someone runs one of these things. The whole idea of like a redemption curve, very similar to what you might find with a mortgage-backed security or a collateralized debt obligation, where you always have redemptions as well, prepayments. Well, I'd be interested in to find out, how, do you guys model yourselves after them, or are you guys different? What do you guys do that are a little bit unique to this particular industry? The other thing too is it would be nice to see, for example, is there a repository of information as far as returns are concerned? Who is getting what? For example, I think someone mentioned that the hedge fund, the private equity fund, they're trying to do 8% after fees, right? That was a goal that they were trying to do, which is pretty darn good. But I'd like to kind of see, is any of that data available publicly so people can actually kind of get a little bit more information.
Right. And I think the unfortunate answer is no, for
Yeah.
the reasons that you highlighted. And it's an incredibly fragmented industry. We have a lot of data that we've collected over the last 5-7 years, from being on both sides, the principal side, the agency side. But I think, getting a kind of a consortium of a few of these guys together would be helpful. I don't know how realistic it is, but it certainly would be helpful. Just spitballing, the National Tax Lien Association has actually formed a number of committees. They're under new leadership since you wrote the 2010 paper. They're actually doing a pretty fantastic job with market research, more so than they ever have done. So I would definitely reach back out to
Okay.
them, and I'm happy to introduce you.
Sure.
And then the other thing is, I would talk to the banks too. I know that all of us have a relationship one way or another. And Capital One, Wells Fargo are the two biggest that lend in liens right now. They might be reticent to give you redemption curves because that's their secret sauce. But if you can convince them that it would be accretive to their business and helpful, then we know them very well, and they're very competent professionals. They've done a great job in this space. So I can't see why they wouldn't at least have the conversations. We're happy to.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I mean, I don't know too many other academics that are doing a lot of this.
No.
It just so happened that I got lucky on that one day, happened to be in Well County, and that kind of piqued my interest. But it certainly is interesting from a certain standpoint. The other thing, of course, is that having that law background, the whole idea of foreclosures and liens and things of that nature, that's just right up my alley as well. So for me, combining the actual kind of lien part, but then you start realizing that there's this finance component to it, it's really kind of interesting.
Yep.
Well, thanks, and I'll buy anybody a beer.
Thank you very much.